Michigan edge rusher Jaishawn Barham is the under-the-radar edge rusher you need to know.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, and on today's episode, we got another scouting report for you for another edge rusher, but this time an under-the-radar prospect in Michigan's Jaishawn Barham. We'll take a look at how he would fit with New Orleans, what it is that helps him stand out, why he's maybe not celebrated as one of the top edge rushers in this class, and the thing that makes him the perfect fit for the New Orleans Saints. We got all that in this scouting report for you, so let's get into it. Jaishawn Barham is absolutely a name to know going into this year's NFL draft. He's one of the edge rushers in this class that's probably more of a middle round guy, second, third, fourth round, being a player that makes it so that if you do miss out at number 8 overall, if you're the New Orleans Saints, on a Rueben Bain Jr. or a David Bailey and an Arvell Reese, right? If all three of those guys go off the board in the top 7 and you're still looking for another edge rusher at a later point, Jaishawn Barham is a player that could end up making you very, very comfortable knowing that you have to wait for an edge rusher for a little while. 22 years old coming into the draft here, 6'3", 240 pounds, 32 and 5/8 inch arms, as well as 10 and 1/4 inch hands. I mention those numbers because those numbers are not far off from where David Bailey's measurements are. I'm not trying to say that Jaishawn Barham is as good a prospect or as complete or as polished a prospect as David Bailey. That would be outlandish of me to say, especially from a polish standpoint. We're going to get to that here in just a moment. But when it comes down to these measurables, he makes a lot of sense in terms of a fit just like David Bailey is. 6'3", 240 pounds as opposed to 251 pounds, 32 and 5/8 inch arms as opposed to 33 and 5/8 inch arms, both 10 and a quarter hand size. So effectively the same prototype is what I'm saying. And so with that, you know that he could be somebody that can stand up off the edge, but also has the ability to play a little bit of off-ball linebacker as well. Ran a 4.64 in the 40-yard dash. Not as good as David Bailey's 4.5 or Jalen Walker's 4.5 years ago, but 4.64, very respectable for the position, shows a bit of that speed that he has. Also had a 33-inch vertical leap as well as a 10'3" broad jump, both showing some above average, I would say, production as an explosive player. But here are a couple of the metrics that help him really, really stand out. So stats-wise, right? 4 sacks last year, as well as 21 total pressures generated. Nothing crazy, 10 tackles for a loss all throughout. But the thing that I do think is important is that he's a player that clocked in an elite 26.2% pressure rate. Those 4 sacks, those 21 pressures came on just 162 pass rush snaps. I'm over here trying to make a drink, apparently. Schnapps. But you can see the promise in a player like this who's really only been a majority of the time pass rusher for one season. And this is part of the things that I think that maybe set him apart is because of the fact that he started off as an off-ball linebacker and now has transitioned to a pass rusher, or a little bit more of a pass rusher, and has made really, really good returns on that transition. Again, 4 sacks last season, forced a fumble, also had 3 passes defended as well. A couple of things that I really like about him, obviously twitchy athlete with impressive speed, especially for the position. He has that off-ball linebacker experience. We're going to break that down here in a little bit. Plays with a super, super high motor and is a very aggressive player in terms of, not necessarily playing timid. He gives a bit of a pop back on those tackles, making sure that ball carriers go backwards. The downside to that, and this is maybe where a little bit of the, okay, could he be a fit for the Saints conversation hits just a little bit of a hurdle or a little bit of a speed bump, is a lot of times that aggression gets misread or even sometimes beyond interpreted, but displayed, I guess, in frustration. And there's this clip that's going around a bunch of him getting flagged for headbutting an official. The more that I look at the clip, the more that I feel like he was just explaining something and then turned his head down to display something and then was whistled because his helmet made contact with the official. But even still, whether or not that's an appropriate read on the situation or he actually did attempt to headbutt the official, there is a demeanor and there is an energy and there is a style or whatever, an attitude that leads a person to believe that that was actually meant to be a headbutt, right? So you have to be aware of like how you're going to be read. This was a big thing watching, Delvin Breaux back in the day. Delvin was a very physical corner, and so he would get these flags thrown on him all the time. And even in cases where his physicality wasn't the same on the times that he was flagged, right? There were times where he was more physical, didn't get flagged, times where he was less physical and got flagged. But because he was that high level or had that high level of physicality, sometimes he would get flagged because the reputation of him being physical existed, right? And so if the reputation of you being, that hot streak or whatever existing, if that reputation of a temper precedes you, you're going to get called for stuff. And things are going to be interpreted with that context in mind, so you have to be aware of that. But if he can get past all that at the next level, and I think that the Saints would provide him an environment where that would be the case, Jaishawn Barham would be a very, very good player to rely on to look at as kind of a mid-round supplement if you miss out on some of these other top-end pass rushers earlier on in the draft. Jaishawn Barham, Malachi Lawrence, David Bailey, all kind of a similar ilk in that way in terms of being these smaller, twitchier, athletic pass rushers that can run the arc. But there's some things that help Barham set apart from the other guys. And among those things, paramount among those things, is versatility. The versatility is really what makes him a perfect fit for the Saints defense. Let me explain why as we continue on with the Scouting Report episode. Take a look at Michigan's Jaishawn Barham on today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the best place to get in on all of the nonstop tournament action as the Final Four is almost here for both tournaments. We took a look at the men's tournament the other day. Let's take a look at the women's tournament. Final Four here with South Carolina heavy underdogs up against UConn. Not used to seeing the South Carolina Gamecocks this low on the list here, but 7.5-point underdogs going up against UConn. You've also got Texas 1.5-point favorites over UCLA. So excellent matchups coming up this weekend. Don't miss it, and don't miss out on your opportunity as well to take advantage of up to $300 back in bonus bets every day for 10 days over at FanDuel, giving you ample opportunity to get in on the rest of this tournament's action. So don't delay. Head over to FanDuel.com to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com to get in on the action and take your shot at up to $300 in bonus bets back every day for 10 days. FanDuel.com. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions all game long and use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter most. Robinhood prediction markets is changing the game. It's people moving the action. So when the momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to be able to apply that knowledge. But now I can take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Jaishawn Barham could be a really, really good fit for the New Orleans Saints defense because of his versatility. Just like we talked about in yesterday's scouting report on Texas Tech edge rusher David Bailey. If you didn't catch that, you can go back and check that out. In fact, I messed up on the publishing on that one, so please go and check it out because it's sitting with like hundreds of views right now because I screwed it up and everything. But that was my own fault. But go and check it out. I think David Bailey would be a perfect fit for Brandon Staley. I think Barham would be a perfect fit for Brandon Staley as well. And I think that unlike Bailey, to where really what makes Bailey such a perfect fit for Bailey Staley, it's not just because they rhyme, but it's because of the fact that he is that proven, productive, 14 and a half sacks last year, 19 and a half tackles for a loss, stand-up pass rushing specialist. That makes a lot of sense for Brandon Staley's system. I think Barham is a perfect fit in a different way, and it's because of his versatility. Not only is he somebody that has experience and has shown some promising beginnings in terms of his kind of more focus or greater focus being put on what he can do as a pass rusher. He has the size and he has the experience to be an off-ball linebacker as well. And that's really important at this other pass rusher side opposite Chase Young. You're going to need somebody that can drop back into coverage. And he has done it a lot. More than 780 coverage snaps in his career, because before he was over playing this pass rusher role, and you can go back to his Maryland days, he played a lot more as an off-ball linebacker dropping back into coverage. And he does that very, very comfortably because of all of the experience that he has as an off-ball linebacker already. So this is not a situation a la Zach Bond, to where you took somebody that was a career producer as an edge rusher and said, no, wait, I have an idea. Let's ask him to do the other thing instead. This is a situation where you've taken somebody that has the background to do the other thing, that has recently begun to do the main thing with the pass rushing side, and now you have the ability to be able to let that player be versatile and do both things in your system and in your scheme. That, to me, is another reason why he becomes a perfect fit for Brandon Staley's defensive scheme, because having that other stand-up potential rusher opposite Chase Young, who can also drop back into coverage, while you also have a guy like Kaden Elliss that can blitz from the second level or pass rush himself as well from an Okie front. There's so many different ways to now disguise how you're deploying these pass rushers, because you can drop Barham back into coverage, you can drop Ellis back into coverage, you can have your slot corner or your star corner rush or drop back into coverage as well. There's just so much that you can do on the defensive line now, or rather at the line of scrimmage with your defensive line and more defenders, that I think I can't imagine Brandon Staley seeing that and going, no, I can't use that. You know what I mean? And so he becomes a really interesting player that's almost, and again, I'm saying this from a play style, role, and sort of measurements side of things, not talent, because you got to get Jaishawn Barham more polished and more comfortable. I'll hit some of the numbers about why that's the case here in just a second. But he reminds me of kind of a second tier to Arvell Reese, of being this really expansive, really versatile chess piece player on the defensive side that you could do a bunch of different things with within the front seven, right? You're not going to Caleb Downs him and put him at a bunch of different places in the defensive back spot. But if you draft Caleb Downs and you go for a wide receiver in the second round, and then you end up with a Jaishawn Barham, and then you add a bigger pass rusher later on in the draft, aren't you kind of cooking a little bit? Like, it's not a bad start, at least, right? It gives you a lot of freedom going into the bottom parts or to the mid to later rounds of the draft. So look, here's a couple of the things that you want to look at in terms of how he can become an even better fit, opportunities for growth, all that. We mentioned the aggressiveness with which he plays and how that can sometimes be misinterpreted as temper. That is contextual. That is something that you can still work on. You can't help what other people perceive. You can help the context that helps them perceive those perceptions, right? Create those perceptions. And so I think that's something that you'd be looking at working with him with. His aggressive play style also creates some issues with angles and tackles as well. 17.1% missed tackle rate last year in 2025. However, that was his career high, and he only went into double digits one other time 2 years before that. So it's not as consistent a thing, but with him being that pass rusher, you don't want a bunch of almost sacks, right? You don't want a bunch of almost tackles for a loss. You want sacks, you want tackles for a loss, you want that production from him. So that 17.1% missed tackle rate is something that evaluators will have to look at, dig into, get to learn to understand why those existed, why that rate is as high as it is, and then figure out whether or not they feel that they can help to bring that down, put him in position to do what it is that he's going to do at a higher level. And that could mean potentially even moving him off ball altogether. So if you draft an edge rusher early, it doesn't rule a Jaishawn Barham out if you like his play style, you like his demeanor, all those other things, and you like that motor, because that motor runs really high. However, there is some concern there about the missed tackles. So you definitely want to make sure that you can address that before you invest in him. One of the other things that he's going to consistently be knocked on, but I don't think I'm not certain would be a big issue for New Orleans, is the tweener status. Is he off ball? Is he edge? I think that the Saints and Brandon Staley will look at him and say, yes, right? In the eyes of the New Orleans Saints, if you could do both in this system, right, it would work out. And so that might murky the waters a little bit in terms of his evaluation for some teams, some clubs, some schemes, some systems. I don't think it would create as much an issue for New Orleans, though. So you get past the temperament, or help him get past the temperament, help to kind of angle some of the context in some of the perception into that, and then let him do what it is that he does best, which is be this hybrid chess piece player. And man, Jaishawn Barham really quickly could be a steal for you, especially if he falls all the way into the beginning of day 3. His range, like I said, is expected to be day 2, early day 3 at the latest, but we never know how the draft goes, right? Those are media expectations. That's not necessarily team expectations. We'll have to see what happens when the actual teams get to making selections. But a very, very promising prospect in my eyes in Jaishawn Barham, a player that I think would make a lot of sense for the New Orleans Saints. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're going to take a look at how the Saints should address, or how the Saints should approach the draft. Build the defense, add weapons, trade up, be aggressive. We'll dive into all of the different intricacies and possibilities in this year's 2026 NFL Draft for the New Orleans Saints, and try to answer the question, what should the Saints do? Got that coming up for you tomorrow. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media, at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.